Well, ladies and gentlemen, welcome. This is Unit 3, British American Colonial Life, and this is Section 7, where we're specifically going to be looking at the French and Indian War. And this is a major conflict in the history of North America because it's going to shift a balance of power. And that's going to be very dramatic, and we're going to see that by the end of today's section. You can see the dates on there, 1754 to 1763. So it looks like about 9 years here in North America. In Europe, it's called the 7 Years' War because they fought for only 7 of the 9 years in Europe. But it starts here, and it's really about what's going on here in North America. So we're going to start looking at that here in this section. This is Section 7 again. And it really starts with a map. You guys know I love my maps. And here you can really kind of see in this particular map a lot of what we're talking about. New Spain, of course, is in green, has what we call the Southwest in Texas. They also have this strip of Florida all the way over to the Mississippi River. That's going to be pretty important later on. We have the English with their Canadian possessions up high, and this strip of land along the Atlantic coast. So we're talking about the 13 colonies over here. Then we have New France, right here in the heart of North America. The entire Mississippi River drainage basin is all of this land, plus the St. Lawrence River in Canada. This is the lucrative fur area producers for the French. And so they are really into that fur, and they're trade by the waterways and the rivers. And you can really see that with this particular map. So what we're going to see in this section is a shift of power between these 3 European empires or countries here in the Americas. And so that's where we're going to head. And by the way, I always get asked, who owns this land up here in the Northwest? What is now Washington and Oregon and Idaho and things like that. This is what we would call disputed territory. The French kind of claim it. The French don't really claim it. The English kind of claim it. The Russians claim it. But there's really no one there who's really doing much of anything, except for, of course, Native Americans. And the European powers are kind of, this is the last frontier for them, and they haven't quite got there yet. So that's something to come a little bit later. And so what we're really going to be talking about is this struggle between the English and the French. And the French and the English have had an incredibly long history of hostility. They really don't like each other. They have this massive rivalry over who is the bigger, more powerful European power. And they've had that going on for hundreds of years at this point. It goes all the way back to the 1200s. You could probably even say it goes back to the 1100s, to be quite honest. So they have this huge history of conflict between them. And it's the type of conflict between the French and the English that if one says something's white, the other's going to say it's black. They are just not going to get along very well at all. And in fact, they had fought numerous wars over the years. You may have heard of the 100 Years' War and the 30 Years' War. And there's a half a dozen or more other wars that these 2 European powers have fought. And they're trying to claim supremacy. Who's best? Who's biggest? Who's toughest? Who's wealthiest? That's what they're really going for. And so what we have coming into here is that they both want to be supreme, not just in Europe now, but once the exploration begins, they want to be supreme in North America. And it's all about the money. It's all about the money, guys. Money and land. This is the really big factor. We have talked previously about mercantilism, how this competition for resources creates warfare. And so we are going to see this economic mercantilism rivalry really in effect here with the beginning of the French and Indian War. And really where we are is that both both France and England claim land here in North America, but neither one's really in it that much. So if you look at my handy map here, this land over here on the far side of the Appalachians, what we were calling the back country earlier, all the way down into the Ohio Valley, this was claimed by both France and by England. And so both of these European powers say, hey, this is my territory, you stay out. And in fact, what is actually in this land other than great farmland is the fur trade. The land is very valuable. The furs are worth gold. And so this really makes having this land or possessing this land very, very important to both France and England. And so we're going to be talking about the Ohio River Valley. And when we talk about the Ohio River Valley, we're talking about all this land right in through here. And this is what is at the heart of the disagreement. Now, remember, it's about the resources. And here we're particularly talking about furs. Both sides want it. They are in competition for it. And they're going to fight for it ultimately. You see on my handy map where I drew a little circle? This is called the Forks of the Ohio. This is where the Ohio River actually starts. And I'm going to move my fat head here a little bit, or try to. There we go. We'll put it down here for now. And this is where the Ohio River begins. The Allegheny comes in from the north, and it meets up another major river, the Monongahela, coming from kind of the south east. They run together, and in a fork type thing, they create a new river, the Ohio River. And it is the gateway to the west. And I say gateway to the west because this is the river, the primary river by which many, many people are going to come west. Remember, travel is primarily by river. Rivers equal highways at this time. So kind of an important piece there. And we can look at my my little historical painting here. This is of the Forks of the Ohio. And you can see really quickly why this would be an important place. This is the Allegheny, this is the Monongahela, and then this creates the Ohio River here. We have a Native American party here, probably traders. They've been to, or they're headed to, the trading post set up here on the juncture of these riverways. Guys, this is a prime real estate spot. You always hear in real estate, it's all about the location, and the location. So here you have trade coming from the north, trade coming from the southeast, trade coming from the west. It is a very lucrative place. You can make lots of money here at the Forks of the Ohio. So whoever controls this land is really going to be in great shape. And that's what it's all going to start over. Who is going to possess this piece of real estate right here? And you can see in this painting, there's a fort built here. And that fort is going to be part of the problem. I have another quick map, obviously very, very simple. Allegheny north, Monongahela from the southeast, forming the Ohio. Fort Duquesne, that's that word right there, Duquesne, is going to be built by the French here first. And that's going to cause a lot of problems. Just pretend Fort Pitt does not exist on this map right now. And so what happens is the governor of Virginia realizes that the Forks of the Ohio is incredibly important. And he is going to send militia, that means citizens who've been trained to protect their local communities, out to seize the Forks of the Ohio and build a fort there. He's going to put in charge a young man who was one of the wealthiest young men in all of Virginia. He had a lot of talent, a lot of admirers. He was a big guy. He was 6'4". He was huge at the time, considered huge. Very wealthy, very good looking, very large individual, larger than life in many cases. And this young man, he's 21. He's going to be put in charge of this band of militia. And the governor of Virginia, a guy by the name of Governor Dinwiddie, is going to tell this young man, go out, build a fort, and take control of this area because we need it economically, for trade, for future land possession. We need the forks of the Ohio. So young George Washington takes off at the head of this band of militia. Now, please understand, George Washington is 21. He is not president of the United States. He's not even a general. He's a lowly appointed colonel in the Virginia militia. So he's just an up-and-coming young man at this point. And what he finds is the French are already there. They have already built Fort Duquesne. And he's going to kind of go back and forth a little bit here, trying to decide what to do. He ultimately attacks some Frenchmen. They kind of are victorious. And then he realizes he's really outnumbered out here in the wilderness. And they begin to retreat. But they realize they're not going to get away from the French and their Indian allies. And so they build a really quick little fort, just a bunch of sticks shoved in the dirt. They call Fort Necessity. And this is really in a terrible position. And the French and their Indian allies are going to force Washington to surrender. He does this. He's allowed to ultimately go back to Virginia. But he's killed Frenchmen. And he's really kind of started the conflict that becomes known as the French and Indian War. Ultimately, this war is going to be fought not just here in North America. It's also going to be fought over in Europe. It's going to be fought in India. It's going to be fought in the Caribbean. And so, really, this is almost kind of like the First World War. Okay, and this is a war between the French on one hand with their Indian allies, because they were really friendly with the Indians, remember, and the British and the American colonists. American colonists, they want land. The Indians don't want them to have land, so they have a conflict too. So it's natural for them to align the way they do. And so there's young George Washington. He is not presidential looking in the slightest, is he? He's got his Virginia militia uniform on. He is marching off to seize the forks of the Ohio in this painting. And obviously he fails, but he's the one who kind of starts the French and Indian War. Now, like I said, the French and Indian War is going to drag on here for about 9 years, and we're really concerned about what's going on in America. We're not going to talk about the war in Europe or in India or in the Caribbean or whatever. But if you kind of look at my handy map, you know I love my maps, we can see quite a few things in this map in particular. In this case, the red indicates British, the blue indicates the French. And it's all about taking control of that Ohio Valley and about taking control of Canada. For the British, the French just want to keep the English out. Okay, they don't want to gain anything. They just want to keep the English out. The English want the land, though. And as you look at this map, a couple of things occur to me very quickly. First of all, if you look at the dates of when things happen, you're going to see that by and large, most of the French victories happened very, very early in the war. Okay? So this kind of indicates to me, first of all, the French and their Indian allies have a very strong position, and the British don't have many regular soldiers here. But over time, we see more and more troop movements by the British and more British victories. And so that tells me it took about a year, 2 years, for British troops to be raised in England, trained, supplied, and then shipped to North America. And they are going to kind of turn the tide of the war in favor of the British. So down here, this is Washington's march back in 1754. Fort Duquesne right here, obviously. And Washington doesn't quite get that far until he's kicked out. The other one we're going to talk about specifically is General Braddock. Edward Braddock of the British Army is going to make an attempt a year later. And this is just going to give you an idea of how brutal this war is going to become. So Braddock arrives, and you can already tell it's not going to go well for him, obviously, by the title of this slide. Um, the French, as I said, were doing very well early on. They are capturing British forts. They are killing American colonists out in the back country in the Ohio Valley. They are burning farms and crops. They're driving families back east. So they're kicking them out. And this really made the native Indians very happy, of course, because they didn't want Americans in their land anyway in the Ohio Valley. So Edward Braddock, he's one of the bright men of the British Army. He's sent to kind of deal with the French threat and show the colonials how this is done. Now, you have to understand, Braddock did not like the colonials. He thought American colonists were lazy. They were cowards. They were good for nothing. He really had this high idea that the British soldier was the best in the world. And honestly, he's not far from it. At the time, the British Army was one of the top armies in the world. And he is going to think that these British troops could not be defeated by a bunch of French and Indians who he had even more disregard for than he did the American colonists. And he's going to tell his soldiers, you're going to fight just like we always have. You're going to wear perfect uniforms. I want them cleaned daily. You're going to march in perfect lines, in perfect formation. When we fight, you're going to fight in formation, under orders. You're going to be listening to the drums and the pipe music. So everything is going to be done according to regulations in Braddock's army, who is going to march out into the wilderness of North America and try to attack Fort Duquesne. And he is told by young George, hey, look, young George is going to go with him, George Washington, and George is going to tell him, Washington's going to say, look, General Braddock, this isn't going to work. They know we're coming. They can see us. They can hear us. We can't march like that through the woods because there's no straight lines. There are no paths. There are no roads for you to march through like this. And Braddock's response was, well, we'll just make a road. We'll take axemen out and we'll cut down the trees and make a road to march all the way in. So in addition to making all the noise, he's slowing down. And so he's got an army of almost 2,000 British regulars. He's got a couple of hundred Virginia frontiersmen and militia under Washington with him. They're going to attack Fort Duquesne. And as you might imagine, it's not going to end well. They're going to be ambushed by a party of French and Indians. In fact, if you look at the historical artwork here, you see all native Indians. In fact, it was a very large force of Native Americans and very, very few Frenchmen actually in on this attack. But they're attacking, in this case, some British soldiers in the woods. And you can see how this would be difficult for the British to fight. They are used to lining up shoulder to shoulder, all firing when ordered, perfect discipline. That does not lead itself to warfare in North American wilderness. And you're wearing those bright red uniforms, and they have white sashes across the front. I mean, what could go wrong out in the wilderness of North America? I mean, just really quick, you can see that this is an invitation to ambush, surprise attack. And that's exactly what's going to happen. And really, it's Washington that saves the day. And I know my big head's covering some text there, but I'm going to leave it put for right now. Washington, actually every officer in the British Army is either killed or wounded within the first, 20 or 30 minutes. And ultimately, it is Washington who Braddock turns to. Braddock is wounded as well, severely. He turns to Washington and says, hey, you have to lead us out. You know the way home. Get us out of here. So Washington's going to lead the survivors out of this ambush into safety. When he gets out, he's going to find he's got 4 bullet holes. through his hat, through his jacket that had been flapping in the breeze and things like that. But he himself is never harmed. 2 horses have been killed while he's riding them. So this man was in the thick of the action, but he himself was never quite harmed. And actually, this is kind of a preview for Washington even during the American Revolution. He's going to get this air of invincibility around him. The soldiers are going to believe the man can't be harmed. He can't be touched. There's something almost special or supernatural about him that allows him to be unharmed in battle. And that's going to cause a lot of his men to really worship Washington as the wars go on. As I said, though, Braddock, he's shot. He's actually going to die from his wounds, and he's going to let Washington lead them out of the ambush. And again, my historical art, I like that too. I think this painting really does a lot of explanation for what we just talked about. First of all, I want to point out the British soldiers back here in the side. These are British regulars. You can see they are marching side by side. They're in perfect lines. Not going to work out too well. To contrast that, look how the American Virginian frontiersmen are. This group of men over here. Okay, they're crouching down. They're using the cover of a tree. They're 2 men are firing. A couple of men are reloading and passing their rifles up. They're working as a team rather than just as a cog in the machine that is going to fire only when told. So these guys are taking advantage of cover and the terrain. These guys are not. These guys are in red. It stands out in the wilderness. These guys are wearing buckskin. They're wearing animal hide, deer hide clothing. Guys, once you wear deer hide clothing for a little bit, it gets stains, sweat stains in it. You get grass stains on it. It's a dirty brownish, greenish color. And so it's going to blend in really, really well out in the wilderness. Of course, you have Braddock. He's been injured. Tragically, he's falling back. He's mortally wounded. He is going to die, and he is giving command to the man on the white horse. Now, in the movies, who always rides a white horse? Well, it's the hero, of course. And in this case, our hero is George Washington. Now, yes, this painting was painted much later, and it was done to portray Washington as a hero, and with some truth. But you get the idea. This is not going to go well for the British. And it really doesn't for a while. And it's not until they can get thousands of men into America that the tide of the war begins to turn. And ultimately, the French and their Indian allies are going to lose. There are several other battles. We are not going to go into those. And the peace treaty that ends the war is the Treaty of Paris of 1763. So first of all, it tells you when it was and where it was. So it was in Paris in 1763. And I think peace treaties are really important because it shows how power changes hands. And that's what we're going to see here. So there are several big results of the Treaty of Paris. First of all, France loses everything in North America. Remember on the first map of this section, France held that in big, huge, kind of wedge-shaped piece right in the heart of North America. That's gone. That is no longer French. That's going to be divided. First of all lands east of the Mississippi go to England. So that Ohio River Valley that this all started over now belongs to the English. Lands west of the Mississippi, what we call Louisiana, goes to the Spanish. And so, for example, where we live here in southeast Missouri, we went from being under French control to Spanish control. Canada is no longer in French hands either. It is also given to England. Okay, so England is going to grab large amounts of land. The Spanish get Louisiana, the lands west of the Mississippi, because they were actually friendly with the French, and the French didn't want Louisiana to go to the English either. So before the treaty happened, they actually gave that land to the Spanish and said, you take it so the English can't get it. So they're trying to keep some lands out of the English hands. France is going to lose all of its territory in India. And ultimately, it's only going to have a few colonies left in the Caribbean, or a few islands. Now, if we think about mercantilism, look at what France has lost. They've lost their colonies. They've lost their source of wealth. So this is going to greatly harm France. 1763, the French Revolution is, 24, 25 years away. So we see about 24, 25 years before the French are broke and destitute, and they begin to have a civil war and change their government too. So this really hurts the French. The American colonies come out of this looking really good. They have a couple of big ideas. First of all, they have this huge sense of pride in themselves. We helped defeat the French. We kicked out the Indians. This land is ours. We should be really proud. We did this. They felt, hey, we have the right to that land west of the Appalachians. That Ohio Valley, we fought over it. We won. This is ours. And they also begin to think a little bit, do we really need the British? We've always had the British around as protection against the French and the Indian threat. But that threat's no longer there. So do they really need British protection? And so this is really going to start many Americans thinking about their relationship with the British home government. I am going to move my big head over to the side real quick. Britain comes out of this as well with some pretty serious stuff. First of all, they had a lot of land, lots of territory, and it's going to be really hard for them to control that much territory. So they're always going to have problems of control. They're going to have a massive army in North America, and they're going to realize it's cheaper to keep them in North America than to ship them home. And that's going to cause problems. People are going to get sick of the British Army always being around, especially when you have to pay for it, because British have massive debt. They spend a lot of money on this war. And the thing I always like to say is, how do countries that are in debt get money? And the answer is pretty simple. They raise taxes. And the Native American Indians are still going to be a problem in the Ohio Valley. When the Treaty of Paris was signed, it was between the French and the English. The natives weren't there. They didn't sign away their homelands. They didn't give up their territory. But to the English, they did. And so that's going to be another issue. And so here's the revised map of North America. You can see that it's changed a lot. There is no French presence at all. They've lost it all. Everything east of the Mississippi is now in the hands of the British. Everything, including Canada, the Ohio Valley. This is all in the hands of the English. Florida gains everything west of the Mississippi. So this Louisiana territory, right about here would be where we live, right here in French Louisiana. And so this all goes to Spain now. This is Spanish Louisiana. Spain is also going to give up Florida to England because they kind of helped the French out. And so the English are going to say, hey, you have to be punished since you helped our enemy. And you're going to have to give up some territory. So the Spanish gave up Florida to the English. So this really changes the map of North America, the French and Indian War. And I know this has been a little long, but here we are at the end of section 7. And I really need you to reflect on what caused the war. I need you to reflect on who benefited from the war and who had to give up a lot because of the war. And that should be pretty evident looking at this slide and a couple of those others. You should be able to see that very, very quickly. If you have any questions, be sure you ask. Otherwise, everyone have a great evening.